Thank you for giving me a few minutes of your time. I really appreciate that.
You're welcome.
I guess I want to start with something pretty general, or pretty broad, I guess. I wanted to ask you how you feel about where we have, the point we've arrived at in the 9/11 truth movement after 13 years, and about whether you've perceived any change in the prospects for getting this information out to and understood by a wider audience.
Well, definitely, but I can only contribute to that from my own point of view, which is in Copenhagen, Denmark. And for those who don't know, Denmark is a rather small country. I think we're around 6 million people. It's about the size of central London and half of Great London, and less than most of cities on the North American continent. So it's manageable for our local truth movement actually, and to address, and we have our own language, even though it's very close to Swedish and Norwegian. So and that's where I and the group here concentrate. So in terms of the media and the political establishment and let's say the elite, we can actually meet one-on-one almost with everybody. And what I've been doing since 2007 is to give presentations. I have given more than 200 presentations, not only in Denmark. About 3/4 is in Denmark and 1/4 is abroad. I've been to 15 countries. So, and this is, and of course, everybody around here, we're doing the regular stuff. We're passing out flyers and DVDs in the streets and trying to get essays in the mainstream press, which is very difficult, and we operate via alternative media on the internet, etc. But this is starting to pay off, actually, definitely. Over the last 2 years, we have experienced definite change in attitude among, let's say, the uninitiated, ordinary people, even though there are still many who have never heard about Building 7. But once they, like, the World Trade Center, which of course is the key to 9/11 truth. Once you've seen that, there's no way back, really.
Right.
You can put it in the back of your mind, but it will never disappear. And when I'm giving a presentation, usually when I show 7 for the first time, I ask people to raise their hands. Have you ever seen this before? And this is what we can do here. Actually, we can get people in, I would not say from the street, but we are presenting the evidence to uninitiated people. And that is the great challenge for the truth movement. Not to preach for the saved, but to get new people in. So when I ask this question, it's anything between a half and almost 100% who have never seen Building 7 before. That is, we're actually moving somebody. The things we're doing around here. And also when you're passing out flyers in the street, 2 years ago, people would be upset and very offensive. Not anymore. I mean, now the curiosity is genuine, and the capacity to take in this information is greatly enhanced. So we are planting. So the seeds we are planting are multiplying by themselves these days. I really believe it's not an avalanche yet, but it's multiplying. It's getting easier and easier. I'm getting invitations more and more to get out and give presentations. I gave 3 last week. I have 2 this week. So all in all, definitely, I think we are on a positive track. And this will never die. If you ask me, why is this? I mean, why are people more open to actually take a look? I believe is because 9/11 is only a part of a great and very serious, decisive change in our Western civilization, and where we should also take a look left and right on the economy, on the environment, of the energy situation, and when people to a greater and greater extent actually realize that they have been fooled in so many other ways, well, then they are more likely to say, hey, well, I lost my job last month, and the boss screwed me. Maybe maybe this story about Osama bin Laden and the 40 hijackers isn't correct either. I mean, you see, you get my point? It's more easy for people actually to realize that there is something very fundamentally wrong with the whole way our society is being run. And this spills over to the 9/11 truth movement, which, by the way, I also think will be decisive when the tsunami comes. The decisive point will be if we have reached critical mass. And we don't know when this will happen. Neither that we reach critical mass and when the tsunami comes.
Yeah, I would think that just the fact that that people see that we're still at this 13 years later, they no longer can see it as sort of a flash in the pan, a sort of a short-term fad. They realize that people that are fighting for this truth or to bring this truth out are just as determined 13 years later as they were 5 years later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also noticed lately, and that is over the last year or two, that there's also a change in, would you say, where people come from. I mean, previously it was from the segment of society where people were out of job and had an alternative view already, or was coming from the peace movement, or were old hippies and people like that. But now it's the middle class. And in Denmark, at least, or probably all over the world, I think that the middle class are profoundly honest. And because they want peace. They only want to live and have a good life. And they don't want to throw bombs on women and children on the other side of the world, basically. I don't believe that. You can manipulate them, yes. But at least around here there is a decency which now is being mobilized in the middle class.
Yeah.
To the extent, I know in the United States there is no middle class left, but there's still a middle class around here. Yes, so far.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's encouraging. It's encouraging from your point of view. Yeah, I wanted to ask. I know that there Richard Gage has been making some progress lately with some media attention. He got a chance to be on C-SPAN. And that was a lot of people were kind of happy to see that, and he was also on Jesse Ventura's show, which was interesting because Ventura had been very pushing the Judy Wood stuff pretty hard, but he seemed to be kind of softening that a little bit in this interview. Although he still brought up a couple of points, kind of in favor of her, but he seemed to be more open to what Richard was saying than he had been before. So that seemed sort of positive. I just wanted to ask you a couple of things he brought up that
I heard it.
Yeah. What did you have any impressions of the interview?
No, I think it went along very well. Actually, in mutual respect, and I was disappointed that Richard got actually interrupted several times in the end, but that's what it was.
Yeah. Well, I guess where it got contentious was over the question of the melted cars near Ground Zero, and That's yeah.
Okay.
There were a couple things. I'm curious. There are a couple things that people who are taking an alternative
You may
perspective.
play the devil's advocate now if you wish.
Well, I'm not necessarily looking to play the devil's advocate, but I did want to sort of just to throw that out there because it would be something I would find it interesting to understand better.
Yes.
Because what Richard said was that the molten iron, I guess, little in very small pieces, I guess, I don't know if you'd call it, could account for, landing on cars could account for them, I guess, catching fire or whatever. Is that the way that you might explain it?
Yeah. The cars were toasted on the roof. If you take a look, and they looked like they had some strange disease. Actually, the lacquer was completely eroded, and this is actually still reacting thermite being thrown out of the towers. I don't know, maybe we should take it from Judy Wood first, and then all the phenomena that there's difficulties explaining.
Yeah, sure.
My suggestion, because Judy Wood is offering the hypothesis that the towers were taken down by directed energy weapons.
Right.
And the problem here is that nobody knows what she's talking about. I don't. And if I ask you, what do you mean by directed energy weapon? I guess that there will be a great pause in this conversation. Could you answer that?
I couldn't, and I'm not sure Judy Wood could either.
Exactly. So nobody knows what Judy Wood is talking about, including herself. And the very expression actually is nonsense to the extent that energy is not a thing. Energy is a concept you use in calculations. Okay? It's not a thing. So you cannot throw concepts around. Okay. So, and on the other side, all weapons, except for biological weapons, could be characterized as directed energy weapons, because the rifle projectile has kinetic energy, and that kinetic energy is used to disrupt tissue or blowing a hole in your windshield, and the energy is converted to heat eventually. And a bomb has energy to blow things apart. But a projectile and a bomb, these are things. I mean, you can point at the weapon. This is the weapon. Presumably, when people say directed energy weapon, they're talking about some kind of beams, okay, space beams. Then tell us, what kind of beam is this? Is this electromagnetic radiation? All right. What wavelength are we dealing with here? Is it X-rays? Is it far ultraviolet? Is it visible? Is it infrared radiation? Is it microwaves? Is it radio waves? What kind of radiation is it? And how should that radiation interact with matter? Is it a particle beam? Is it neutrons? Or is it electrons? Is it protons? Whatever, just tell it what it is, and let us take it from there. And until that happens, there really is any discussion. You know, it's very hard to have an opinion on Judy Wood's hypothesis, because there is none. You see? Okay.
Yeah.
There is, and then there is a series of observations, and also Jesse Ventura. How do you explain this? How do you explain that? That means that there is something which Judy Wood doesn't understand. And basically, I can say that Judy Wood's lack of understanding is not among my premises.
Right.
So we can take them from one end to the other end and talk about them.
So some of the things that get brought up, I'd like to just get a sense from you that whether these things can be explained within, conventional explosives and thermite as well. Things like the pulverized concrete, the pools of molten iron under the buildings, that Swiss cheese effect that I've heard you talk about with some of the beams that we've seen. And also and we already mentioned the cars, but are these all things that that have reasonable explanations?
Oh yeah, should we take them one by one? I mean, if you blow up a building, you pulverize the concrete. That's as easy as it is. And the only concrete in the towers were the slabs, the floor slabs, and there were very serious, very strong forces on display when you saw the towers being blown apart. This is what an awesome spectacle we're seeing here. It's being blown up. That's as simple as that is. And your next point was the molten iron?
Yes.
Okay, that is number one product from the thermite reaction. In my scenario, I mean, previously I was very reluctant discussing hypothetical black scenarios because we shouldn't do that. But to the extent that we have to explain phenomena, let's go and do it. So the molten iron definitely there's only one explanation for the observations of molten iron, and that's the thermite reaction. Eventually, and then the third thing you mentioned was the Swiss cheese steel.
Yeah.
And then you're referring to multiple pictures, and in particular to the scientific work by Professor Jonathan Barnett and his colleague Sisson. Right now I forgot his first name, but these two workers from Worcester Institute of Technology, they got actually samples of the steel beams, both from the towers and from 7, very early on, and I believe it was a slip from FEMA that they got them at all. This was a mistake.
Right.
But right after, actually, they got these samples, and they found what you call sulfidation of steel. That is, they're taking this is metallurgy. It's high-end research science here. They're taking a slice of the steel and putting it on the electron microscope, and then you can see a compound between iron and sulfur. It's called iron 2 sulfide. And technical term, sulfidation of steel. This is an unambiguous proof that thermate was applied to cut these steel beams. And this is a special kind of thermite which contains sulfur, and usually also barium nitrate. It's an old thing in military connections. That this is how you cut steel beams, by thermate, which is a variety of thermite reaction where you put in sulfur and barium nitrate and other stuff. You can also put in potassium permanganate. It makes the reaction more violent, and it lowers the melting point of steel. That's what the sulfur does. It forms a so-called eutectic mixture with iron, lowering the melting point, which means that the thermite reaction, which is running in parallel, is cutting through the steel like a hot knife through butter. And this is how, I believe, the columns were cut, preceding the explosions. You can see molten iron running out of the corner of the South Tower minutes before everything is being blown up. So that you're weakening the whole structure to the extent that it is still standing, and then in comes the explosives. Now, the red grade chips, which I have investigated together with, Professor Stephen Jones and Kevin Ryan and Jeffrey Farah and 5 other scientists. And we found it was published in 2009, but actually on that time, the work had been ongoing for 18 months. Stephen Jones discovered the first chips, let me see, in late 2007. They cannot account for this observation. We do not see sulfur. So for a long time we said, okay, we don't know where the red grade chips fit in, because they display thermite reaction when you heat them up. You form the iron spheres and elemental iron. So they are thermitic. But they do not fit in with the observation by Jonathan Barnett on the Worcester Institute of Technology, because we do not see sulfur. There's no sulfur. So for a long time I was thinking about that, and eventually, well, I had an idea which I presented for the first time at the Toronto hearings in 2011. You know, there's several observations. We can bring in the toasted cars here now, because the cars which were parked around the towers, predominantly, they were toasted on top of them. But the seats were still there. I mean, the car had not burned out, but it was toasted, apparently from the fallout from the towers. Other observations, you know, the ground zero kept on burning for 3 months at least. Officially, the fires were extinguished on December,
yeah,
the 20th. But believe me, stuff was happening far into February. And Kevin Ryan and Stephen E. Jones and other people had a scientific publication in the Environmentalist. When they went through the data from the Environment Protection Agency about analysis, air quality analysis in the fall of 2001. And over this 3-month period, there were eruptions of strange chemicals from ground zero, completely thousands of times beyond threshold, ordinary levels. It was like a volcano. On a certain day, the ground literally exploded with chemicals. I can mention what these chemicals are, but it will not make any difference. That is, they were really something. This was the longest smoking gun in history. They kept on reacting for 3 months. These are not ordinary fires. There were really something going on. And having all these pieces of the puzzle together, finally, you know, I've given this presentation on World Trade Center collapses many times. That is, I have watched particularly David Chandler's videos again and again and again, together with different audiences. And if you draw on your memory and again take a look on the collapses of the Twin Towers, you will agree that all the fragments being thrown out from the Twin Towers, and they have been thrown up and out. 100 meters, 10, 12 tons thrown 100 meters. Fragments of 4 tons being thrown 200 meters. There are enormous forces on display here. All these fragments are drawing behind them a completely uniform white smoke trail. Remember? Can you see it from your inner view? They all have a white smoke trail. This is not wallboard. This is not wallboard. This is not concrete. This is an ongoing chemical reaction. Okay? And the other product of the thermite reaction, aluminum oxide, is white. Okay? You may recall David Chandler has a video called Smoking Guns, where he is showing a short sequence of the collapse of the South Tower. On that video, he is pointing to fragments which are being accelerated by forces other than gravity. They're actually falling faster than free fall, apparently. You see fragments which are making 90 degrees turns in midair. And the trajectory they're following is not linear. It's like a drunk man on a bicycle. Okay. So I presented the idea that actually the driving force, and I can bring in more evidence than this for what I'm saying now, is the best hypothesis. The driving force for moving these fragments away and out from the Twin Towers were thermitic in origin. And now the red-grey chips fit in very nicely. After the Toronto hearings, David Chandler went back home and he actually measured the acceleration of one of these fragments, and he found 11 meters per second squared. And this is faster than free fall, which is 9.8 meters per second squared. That's it.
Yeah.
He hit the nail with a hammer. This means that these fragments are driven by, call it whatever you want. I'm not sure there is a correct name for it. You may call it rocket fuel or propellers or whatever, or late firing explosives. We're here on the borderline between slow explosives and rocket fuel. That is a reaction which is giving off a gas slower than regular explosives, but faster than rocket fuel.
Certainly not gravity, though.
Exactly. And if you take a closer look on the fragments coming out, some of them are exploding in mid-air. Okay? And here, actually, the red-grey chips fit in very nicely because they can be, nanothermite can be administered. You can paint it on. You can spray it. You can apply that on very easily.
Yeah.
But so that explains everything, actually.
Right. So
also the abnormous level of ionosphere, which was demonstrated very early, 2003 already, by the R.J. Lee group, in Deutsche Bank building across the street from the South Tower, where they found that the dust in Deutsche Bank building contained 5.87% by weight ionospheres. This number is ridiculously high, but and I could elaborate on that, but it's beyond any discussion that it is beyond. It's 100. I think it's 130 times more than the background level in ordinary building dust. And that means that the dust, the fragments, the material, which ended up in Deutsche Bank building, was not flown in there. It was thrown in there. So the process which is moving material from the South Tower into the Deutsche Bank building was thermitic. Okay? And again, the nanothermite fits in very nicely.
Could you clarify for me what exactly is the evidence for nano? Like, what is the difference between evidence for thermite in general and nanothermite? Like, is it the red-gray chips that are the nanothermite?
That's what it is. That's right.
Okay, and what makes those nanothermite as opposed to thermite? Okay,
ordinary thermite is a chemical discovery or description which dates back to 1893, when a German chemist called Hans Goldschmidt discovered that if you mix very finely divided aluminum and very finely divided iron oxide, if you have problem with a chemical term like iron oxide, you may call it rust. So you have these two powders very finely divided, and if you mix them, if you can make them react, it's not very easy. You get a reaction which is violent in terms of there's enormous amount of heat being developed, and you form elemental iron and aluminum oxide. And the elemental iron comes out as molten iron at a temperature of 2,500 degrees centigrade. I don't know how much that is in Fahrenheit, but it's about 1,000 degrees centigrade above the melting point of iron. So the iron coming out here is very, very hot. And it is a very useful reaction. It can be used for welding. It was patented already in 1898, and it was used for the first time welding tram rails in 1899. And I guess that most of the rails on the American prairie has been has been welded by the means of the thermite reaction, I would guess. I don't know. But this is this is your source of molten iron, in particular when you're out in the wilderness. But because the iron coming out of this reaction is very hot, it can be used to destroy other items, steel and armor. So the thermite reaction and varieties, it can be varied in many ways. Has been used for military purposes since World War One, in grenades, in torpedoes. The hand grenades under First World War, they had thermite charges, as I understand, and torpedoes, they're not blowing their way through the ship's sides. They are burning their way through, and cave busters, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But the enormous energy in the thermite reaction can be turned around if you, by the proper additives, you can make them into an explosive. But you have to add other stuff. The classical Goldschmidt thermite is an incendiary. Okay. Now enter nanotechnology in the 1980s and early 1990s, which is a different approach to making materials. Goldschmidt was mixing things. He was taking aluminum and dividing it making it into a powder and mixing things. This is what we call top-down way of making materials. In nanotechnology, it's a bottom-up approach. That is, we're building the materials from the atomic and the molecular level upwards. It has several advantages. The dominant is in the nano, which was basically, it means dwarf in Greek, but it refers to that everything is very, very small. So that is that the particles are so small that you're actually approaching molecular dimensions, making everything's reacting with each other much faster, and you have materials which are much easier to manipulate and handle and very safe. We know that these energetic materials, which is a broader term for what we're talking about here, has been investigated in the military laboratories since the late 1980s, early 1990s. So we know this research has been going on in the military laboratories, and we definitely understand all the principles behind making nanothermitic materials. It's a very broad class of materials. There's no such thing as nanothermite. When people come and say, I don't believe that the World Trade Center was taken down by nanothermite, it's a term, a general term for a whole class of energetic materials, among which the wet grade chips is something probably very specific. But they are thermitic because the most fundamental observation of the wet grade chips that we made is that when you heat them up, they react and you form elemental iron. And that's the thermite process. That's about it.
Right. So it's something, what makes it nanothermite is it's something, as you said, that's built up from the atomic and molecular level.
Yeah, nanotechnology is the bottom-up approach. That is, of course, you have nature doing the work. You're not sitting with a set of tweezers and mixing these things. But you do. If you were mixing sugar and flour, you would have the two powders and you would mix them mechanically. But in nanotechnology, you're having the chemistry do the work to build the things, the materials, from the bottom up. So we are filling in the gap between molecules and you may say the macroscopic world, which is, I don't know if you used to, which is from 1/1000th of a millimeter and below to molecules. This is the gap from 1 nanometer to 1/1000th of a millimeter. This is the gap in terms of dimension that nanotechnology is filling up. Mm-hmm.
Maybe one thing I wanted to ask you too is I was struck by your comment on the 9/11 Truth Teleconference call that that no one really tested for other types of explosives in the WTC dust, and I'm wondering why that wouldn't have been done by somebody. Like you mentioned also that by now that probably wouldn't be possible because those traces would not be there anymore. What I'm wondering is, was there a time when that would have been possible if somebody had thought to do it, why wasn't it done? I guess.
I guess so. I mean, if you have an explosive event, the police comes, and there's always something left, and they can find out what kind of explosive it was used. If you, the classical explosives, the nitro aromatic compounds, amines, like TNT or dynamite is not an aromatic compound, but TNT and RDX and all this stuff. But then you have a whole kit of very specific reactions. I mean, when you're looking for an explosive, you have if you're not a scientist, you're looking for something specific. So they're looking for, say, a whole range of 10, I don't know, 15 different explosives. So these test kits that you can probably buy. That definitely could be done, and FEMA should have done that immediately. And NIST should have done that immediately, and they had the samples for doing that. But their response why they didn't do it was there was no sense in looking for something which isn't there. That's right. What they said.
Yes.
I mean, they have the capacity. Right. This is tedious work. I mean, you have to have a laboratory, you have to have chemicals, and you have to have a forensic lab for doing that. And we don't.
They didn't want to find that, though, did they?
And maybe we don't know what kind of explosives were used. Maybe they were not covered by these kits, which means that you have to to look for everything which is in there, which definitely is possible. But it's a tedious work. And on top of that, I don't know if you've ever been in vicinity of these type of explosives, but I have. They have a smell, and you can send in the dogs to smell them out. Okay, conventional explosives, they have a smell, and if something have a smell, means that it has a vapor pressure, that it is evaporating slowly. Yes, but if the dogs can smell them, at some point they can't smell them anymore because they aren't there anymore. They simply disappear. And I would guess after 10 years, but I'm not a forensic scientist in that sense. It would not be worth the effort. And personally, I'm not interested in putting time into that. I have other more serious things to do.
Yeah.
And I don't have the samples yet. We don't have good samples. They were used up already in 2009. Mm-hmm. Many people have asked us for it, but we don't have any good samples yet. But NIST certainly must have tons of them.
Yeah.
And they should have done. Of course, they should have done that.
Right, but they weren't. That wasn't in their interest to find that, was it? I mean, they were.
Well, they said there's no sense in looking for something which isn't there.
Yeah, that's interesting logic.
But the situation now, and I wish to stress is, we do not know what kind of explosives were used in 7 and the Twin Towers. We know that incendiaries were used. They must, by definition, have been thermitic. And we see the iron and so forth. But we don't know the nature of the explosives. They could have been what you call ordinary, I call molecular explosives. What the chemists have made over the years of all kinds of explosives, they are molecular. But they could also have been nanotechnological explosives.
Right.
But, I mean, if you had to blow up 3 high-rises while 1 billion people were watching in real time, you wouldn't rely on explosives which had never been tested on that scale before. There were no rehearsals,
No.
there were no reruns. So I would probably have put in some of the good old stuff I knew was working. And when everything had been calculated, I would throw in 50% over capacity to make sure they came down. And this is what you see.
Right. What I want to get your comment on what somebody who's a proponent of the nuclear theory, Jim Fetzer, says that too much emphasis has been placed on thermite, and I just wanted to get your response to that.
Well, not by me. I mean, really, if you see the whole pile of evidence against the official version of events, the nanothermite is only an academic footnote. And this is my opinion, really. I mean, there's a mountain of evidence, and the nanothermite is only a very small part of it. I wouldn't hesitate to call it a scientific footnote, really. It fits nicely, but it has no forensic value on its own, actually. You could not take it into court alone. But if you put it into the context, everything becomes meaningful. And that's where it gets its strength. So whatever Jim Fetzer is coming along with, this is a straw man argument, really. Nobody has promoted nanothermite.
Right. So, but now, I mean, thermitic material, as you say, that shouldn't be in the dust.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it wouldn't be there.
Yeah. And the problem is that, considering the level of the educational level among ordinary people in terms of chemistry, nobody understands what a thermitic reaction is. So if somebody had fallen for the what you call it, I call it an explosive. I mean, I have done that once actually, also in TV interview very early. When you have 5 minutes and there's no time to explain anything. I have called it an explosive, but it really isn't. At least not what my understanding is now. And if somebody claims that like Jim Fetzer is saying, that is putting a strawman argument and saying that we claim that the World Trade Center was taken down by nanothermite exclusively, it's totally rubbish. No responsible scientist has ever claimed that. So this is a pure strawman argument from the Jim Fetzer's side.
Yeah, I just wrote an article this week actually where I proposed that what we should be doing is focusing not on things like, I mean, I was listing some things that I thought we should be focusing less on, and one of them was the nuclear argument, and one of them was Judy Wood's, and I want to know if you would agree with me that the evidence that we have that explosives were used to bring the towers down, that given that we pretty much all agree on that's where our focus should really be, on that evidence. Does that sort of agree with your position?
I mean, how can you? The mini-nuke theory and Judy Wood theory is totally nonsense. I mean, it's not a matter of focus. It's not.
Well, what I mean by that is that the evidence that you're talking about for explosives, that's where we should be putting our attention. Focus is maybe the wrong word, but
I mean, Judy Wood and the mini-nuke people, they want to waste your time. That's all there is into it.
Yeah.
But if you care to watch, if you care to look, you can see the Twin Towers are being blown up from the top down. And that's it. It's as simple as that.
Right. In other words, we don't really need more than that, because that proves...
Of course. And free fall.
Yeah.
And free fall, I'm giving presentations on this. And my presentation runs over 2 hours, and we have an intermission and a discussion afterwards. So 2 times 60 minutes. Maybe I spend 10 minutes on the nanothermite in the end. And this is only before I show the South Tower collapsing, where everybody can see the white smoke trails from the fragments. And then we are ending up with a collapse scenario which is completely consistent. We have a blast scenario which are completely consistent, and that's as much as you can ask from a scientific theory. There's no truth in science. There's only the best hypothesis of the day. But we have that. Actually, there's no phenomena which are not explained. There are many things we do not know, among them what kind of explosives were used. But we have a pretty firm grasp on the rest of it.
Well, Neil, I think I've kept you over the time that you promised us.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you being flexible on that.
It's been interesting. Truth will prevail.
Absolutely. I believe that too.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.